Sawyer Ridge never thought moving to a quiet Colorado neighborhood would turn into a war zone. But that's the thing about peace. It only lasts until someone tries to take it from you. He was a 48-year-old retired Army engineer. A calm man, calculated most days. He lived in flannel, cooked bacon in a cast-iron skillet, and took long walks with his golden retriever, Bucky, down the narrow forest trail behind his property. That trail wasn't just a dirt path. It was his sanctuary, his reset button, a place where the world faded away, and the only thing that mattered was the quiet sound of leaves and the rhythm of Bucky's happy trot. The land was his. He'd bought it years ago, acres of unspoiled land bordering a sleepy HOA neighborhood called Oak Meadow Hollow. The house sat right on the edge of the community boundary, a fact no one cared about, until the HOA got a new president, Gretchen Langley. She was sharp-tongued, always wore pastel tracksuits, and walked like she was inspecting a crime scene. It wasn't long before she started making herself known. First came the passive-aggressive newsletters slipped into everyone's mailbox. Then came the uninvited courtesy visits, and then she came for Sawyer. It happened on a chilly Tuesday morning. Sawyer was walking Bucky as usual when he saw Gretchen standing by the trailhead on his side of the fence, arms folded like she was ready to write a citation. "You're trespassing," she said flatly. Sawyer blinked. "Excuse me, this trail is HOA property, for official members only." Sawyer let out a single dry laugh. "Ma'am, this trail is on my land. You might want to check your maps before accusing someone." But she didn't back down. She just took a photo of him with her phone and scribbled something on a clipboard she seemed to carry like a badge. The next day, Sawyer found a wooden stake, with red tape hammered into the middle of the trail, and a freshly mounted sign, "Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. Oak Meadow, HOA." Sawyer pulled it out of the ground and threw it into the brush. He didn't think much of it, until the tension escalated into something horrific. 1 week later, just before sunrise, Sawyer poured his coffee, whistled for Bucky, and set off toward the woods. Bucky barked once, then darted ahead like he always did, eager to chase shadows and squirrels. Then came the sound, a single, sharp crack. Not a branch, not thunder. A gunshot. Dropped his thermos and ran. His boots slammed against the dirt, heart pounding, adrenaline roaring through his veins. And then he saw him. Bucky collapsed, whimpering, blood soaking into the earth beneath him. Sawyer dropped to his knees, scooped him up, and ran all the way back to the house, screaming for Dana. They rushed him to the emergency vet. But it was too late. The bullet had hit a major artery. He bled out before the vet could operate. The grief was a tidal wave. But what followed wasn't just sadness, it was rage, cold, controlled, focused, because the surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera revealed everything. A man in a uniform, hired by the HOA, had been posted near the trail. Armed Gretchen had authorized the patrol. They claimed Bucky was awfully-ish aggressive, that the guard feared for his safety. But everyone knew Bucky, a local legend. The golden retriever who played with kids, greeted joggers, and never barked unless someone was sneaking where they shouldn't be. Sawyer didn't say much that night. He didn't argue, didn't scream. He just went to the closet, pulled out a heavy metal box, and opened it. Inside was a map, a surveyor's blueprint, and the deed. The trail they claimed was theirs. The one where they shot his dog. It was 100% on Sawyer's land. That was the moment something changed in his eyes. He wasn't going to sue. He wasn't going to protest. He was going to bury the HOA, using their own rules, their own lies, and their own signatures. And he knew exactly where to start. Because back in his army days, they used to call him the guy who could burn a bridge without ever lighting a match. Sawyer Ridge didn't sleep that night, while Dana cried quietly in their room, cradling Bucky's collar like it was the only thing left of him. Sawyer sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, land deed, and a steaming cup of black coffee that went cold hours ago. He hadn't been this focused since his last deployment. The grief still tore at his chest, but he wasn't going to let it blind him. He needed to be sharper than ever. Because he wasn't up against some random thug, he was up against an HOA board that played dirty, wrote their own rules, and didn't care who they hurt along the way. But they made one mistake. They thought they were untouchable. Sawyer turned his attention to the deed. He'd bought this house because of the acreage, not just the backyard, but the easement and trail behind it, the path that had become his daily ritual with Bucky. That trail wasn't public, it wasn't shared, it wasn't even part of HOA property. It was his. The map from the county confirmed it. The plat lines were clean. Iron markers still stood where they were planted years ago, which meant Gretchen Langley had ordered an armed security contractor onto private property, and that man had killed his dog. He picked up his phone and made a call. It went to voicemail. "Colt, it's Sawyer. I need surveillance equipment. No questions. Just send me what you used in Kentucky tree cams. Night vision, remote upload, same Dropbox." He hung up. Colt was a former Army buddy who now worked security contracts in the private sector. He owed Sawyer, and he delivered out the next morning. Sawyer walked the trail and began marking tree subtle spots where cameras would blend in naturally. Places where HOA members thought they weren't being watched. It wasn't just about catching someone in the act. He needed a pattern. He needed evidence of trespassing, harassment, intimidation, and misuse of HOA funds. That afternoon, he visited the county clerk's office. He pulled property records, trail surveys, permits, anything that might show what the HOA was planning. The more he dug, the more twisted it got. The HOA had recently filed an intent to improve communal infrastructure right along his boundary line. A vague application. No maps. No approvals yet, but the phrasing was slippery. It gave them just enough wiggle room to act like the trail was shared space when it absolutely wasn't. That same evening, a flatbed truck arrived carrying a cement mixer. Sawyer watched from his window as a group of construction workers stepped out, confused. They looked at their clipboard, pointed at the trail, then shrugged and started setting up stakes. By the time he got outside, the site was roped off with yellow caution tape and cheap plastic flags. One of the men introduced himself as the foreman. Says here we're laying concrete for a small community gazebo. Property belongs to Oakmeadow Hollow. We were told the owner approved it. Sawyer looked at the clipboard. The signature wasn't his. It wasn't Dana's either. Who gave you permission? Gretchen Langley. Sawyer nodded slowly, then walked back inside without another word. Later that night, he uploaded his first few camera feeds and sat in silence as he watched Gretchen walk the trail with 2 board members, pointing and smiling like a queen planning a castle. She stepped directly onto Sawyer's land, again and again. Worse, he caught her talking to one of the guards, the same company that had shot Bucky. Keep a close eye on him, she said on camera. He's unstable. He's going to snap eventually, and when he does, I want it documented. That clip was gold. Sawyer stitched it together with a snapshot of his deed and saved the file under one word: checkmate. But then something unexpected happened. An anonymous envelope showed up in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single flash drive. He plugged it in. There was video. Blurry, grainy, but damning. It showed Gretchen 2 years ago, standing in the same woods. Only this time, she was giving cash to a man in a city truck. And behind her, a sign that read, "Future site of Oak Meadow Recreational Pavilion." There had never been any permit filed for it. Sawyer leaned back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't just HOA bullying, this was fraud. And now he had a paper trail and video that connected her to it. He smiled for the first time in days, because the moment the HOA shot his dog, they started a fire. But they had no idea the man they were up against had once designed demolitions for a living. And now, he wasn't just going to clear the land, he was going to erase the entire HOA from the map. Sawyer Ridge wasn't just playing defense anymore. He had footage. He had documents. He had a plan. But more than anything, he had time. The HOA had just handed him a reason to burn it all down. Gretchen Langley had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And while the neighborhood still thought of Sawyer as the quiet guy with the dog, he was now something else entirely. A hunter. For 3 days, he combed through the contents of the flash drive. The anonymous tip hadn't just included the bribery video, it had scanned emails, meeting notes, even a spreadsheet that listed payouts. Labeled Landscape Fund, Phase 2. Except the totals didn't match the official HOA records. Not even close. There were thousands of dollars unaccounted for, and names he recognized. Mike Cleason, the HOA treasurer, Linda Bessman, the secretary, even the contractor who poured the HOA's new tennis court last spring. Sawyer didn't need a courtroom to see what it was. This was embezzlement. He checked dates, cross-referenced permits, tracked fake project costs. It was all there, right under their noses. The entire HOA board was either blind or dirty, and Gretchen was the ringleader. But to take them down, he couldn't act like a madman. He needed to move like a chess master, every move calculated, every piece used. That's when he decided to go to the next HOA meeting. No confrontation, not yet, just attendance. When he walked in, people glanced, whispered, some gave sympathetic nods. Word about Bucky had spread. Others avoided eye contact. Gretchen, sitting at the center of the long table, gave him a tight, rehearsed smile. "Mr. Ridge," she said, as if she were a politician, "we're so sorry for your loss. We hope this unfortunate incident doesn't cause any ... community division." Sawyer nodded politely. "Appreciate the concern. I just wanted to observe, make sure I understand how decisions are made around here." The meeting droned on budget approvals, landscaping proposals, complaints about lawn height, but Sawyer watched every face, every twitchered, every sideways glance. And when Gretchen mentioned the upcoming trail beautification project, he saw the tension. 2 board members shifted in their seats. One bit her lip. The treasurer kept his eyes down. Sawyer raised his hand. "Quick question, who approved construction on my private property?" The room went still. Gretchen gave a tight laugh. "Mr. Ridge, as we've explained, there's a community easement." "No, there's not," he interrupted. "And I have the original deed, the plat map, and the county surveyor's signature to prove it." Whispers broke out across the room. Sawyer continued, voice calm but hard. "You've poured concrete, erected signage, and sent armed personnel onto my land without consent. That's trespassing, and it's a felony when someone dies. Gretchen's smile faltered. I think perhaps we should discuss this. I'm not done. Sawyer reached into his messenger bag and pulled out an envelope. He walked to the front of the room and dropped it on the table. Inside was a copy of the video, the bribery, the spreadsheet, the emails, all of it. This is going to the county, the news, and the DA. If this board doesn't vote to suspend all operations, I'll see to it every one of you ends up in court. Dead silence. Then someone coughed. Another member slowly turned to Gretchen. The treasurer, Mike, cleared his throat. Maybe we should call a special meeting, just the board. Sawyer turned and walked out, the room in chaos behind him. Back home, he didn't celebrate. He got to work. He filed a cease and desist with the county clerk to halt all HOA activity on his land. He requested a full audit of Okemito Hollow's budget. And, just to be thorough, he scheduled a private surveyor to revalidate the trail's boundaries on video. But the real bombshell came the next morning. Another envelope, no return address. Inside, a copy of a non-disclosure agreement, signed by Gretchen, dated 2 years ago. Attached a letter from a former HOA board member. Sawyer, they paid me to keep quiet. About the trail, the bribes, the construction, I'm done protecting her. The HOA doesn't just abuse power, it hides something bigger. Check the parcel across from the trailhead. Lot 17. They buried more than permits. Sawyer folded the letter, heart racing. Lot 17 was undeveloped, overgrown, and owned by the HOA itself. He grabbed his keys, because now, the fight wasn't just about revenge, it was about the truth. The day the HOA shot my dog was the day everything changed. I remember how the bright morning sun seemed almost cruel against the coldness I felt inside. My dog, Max, was more than a pet. He was family. My loyal companion on those trails, the HOA insisted, were theirs. But they had no right. The way they shot him was a betrayal, not just of me, but of every neighbor who ever believed in community. Sat by Max's side, tears blurring my vision, a helpless fury burning in my chest. That was the breaking point. I knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't let the HOA get away with their lies and violence. The trail wasn't theirs. It was ours. Mine, Max's, and everyone who had walked it before. Determined, I started digging. Late nights hunched over old maps, property deeds, and legal documents became my new routine. What I uncovered was a mess of conflicting claims and shady paperwork that the HOA had relied on to bully neighbors for years. The trail, that beautiful ribbon of dirt winding through trees and wildflowers, had been a public easement before the HOA formed. Open to all, that HOA had quietly tried to rewrite history. Their ownership was based on dubious claims, forged by fear and intimidation rather than truth. They used threats and scare tactics, cameras pointed like guns at anyone who dared enter. Shooting Max was their most brutal act yet, abuse of power to silence dissent, but I refused to be silenced. With a stack of evidence in hand, I hired a fierce property lawyer named Rachel. She was sharp, unafraid to face off against powerful adversaries, and immediately believed in the righteousness of our cause. Together, we filed a lawsuit challenging the HOA's claims and demanding justice for Max. The community's reaction was mixed. Some neighbors, scared of retaliation, kept their distance. Others, quietly fed up with the HOA's overreach, reached out with support and stories of their own ruins. Slowly, a movement grew, a coalition of residents ready to reclaim their rights and stand against the HOA's tyranny. The HOA board, once smug and untouchable, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Their attempts to dismiss the case were blocked, and the media picked up the story. The local paper ran headlines about the trail battle and the shot dog controversy. Public pressure mounted. At the courthouse, tension filled the air. I stood tall, though my hands trembled, as Rachel presented our case. We showed the historical maps, testimony from longtime residents, and documented evidence of the HOA's aggressive tactics. But the most powerful moment was when we recounted the shooting incident, the reckless endangerment of a harmless dog, and the terror it inflicted on the neighborhood. The judge listened intently, visibly disturbed by the HOA's conduct. Finally, the ruling came. The judge declared the trail and the surrounding land legally mine, invalidating the HOA's claim entirely. More than that, the HOA was ordered to disband their charter, revoked for violating property laws and the public trust. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some shocked, others relieved. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, mixed with sorrow for Max, who wasn't there to see the victory. Walking the trail afterward felt like reclaiming a lost piece of myself. The air smelled fresher, the sun warmer. I could hear birdsong instead of silence enforced by fear. The trail, once a battleground, was now a symbol of resilience. Neighbors came forward, some with flowers, others with stories about how the HOA had affected their lives. Together, we began plans to restore the trail, not as private property, but as a shared community space, open to all who loved nature and freedom. Without the HOA's oppressive presence, the neighborhood began to breathe again. We formed a voluntary association, built on respect and cooperation rather than control and threats. And I knew, deep in my heart, that Max's spirit was with us on that trail. Watching over the new chapter we were writing, this fight wasn't just about land, it was about standing up to injustice, about fighting back when the powerful try to crush the powerless. It was about love, for a dog, for a community, for the freedom to walk a trail without fear. And now, every time I step onto that path, I remember the cost and the triumph. The HOA tried to claim the trail, shot my dog to scare me away. But in the end, I owned the land, erased their tyranny, and reclaimed the future. Max's fight was never in vain. Neither was mine. Sawyer Ridge stared at the burner phone for a long time after the call ended. The voice had been calm, steady, not angry, just certain. Like a man who'd already seen too much and wanted to stop someone else from making the same mistake. You dig too deep, and you'll find bodies. Sawyer had survived IEDs, ambushes, and betrayal overseas, but nothing felt as cold as the silence after that call. He sat down at the kitchen table and laid everything out in front of him. The recovered handgun, the faded documents, the body cam, footage from Lot 17. Next to it sat a printed copy of the complaint from Aaron Fisk, the man who vanished after calling out unauthorized activity. And then it hit him. If someone had taken the time to warn him, then someone else out there knew what Gretchen had done, maybe even helped cover it up. Maybe now, they were second-guessing. Sawyer sent a single text to Colt. Trace the number. Quiet. I think we've got a ghost. Colt responded in less than a minute. Already on it. It's bouncing through 3 proxies. Not amateur work, but give me a day, I'll dig. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the neighborhood lights flicked on one by one, Sawyer took his truck down to the mail center. Inside his P.O. box was a thick manila envelope. Don't return address. He opened it in the front seat. Inside, 50 printed photos. Most were grainy security stills taken from HOA meetings, board dinners, parking lot handshakes. But one photo made Sawyer's blood freeze. It was Gretchen Langley standing next to a man he didn't recognize. An Aaron Fisk. Fisk looked uncomfortable. The man next to him was holding a folder. A date was scribbled on the back. March 18, 2022, 1 week before Aaron disappeared. Tucked inside the envelope was a note, typed in courier font. I was on the board once. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough. The HOA's real purpose wasn't neighborhood upkeep. It was control, financial leverage, laundering. Aaron got too close. They bought him out. Or maybe they didn't. Either way, they made him vanish. Don't trust the lawyer. He's in on it. Keep digging. Lot 17 isn't the only site. Sawyer scanned the HOA map again. Lot 12. Another maintenance property. A narrow lot next to the retention pond. Just big enough to bury a secret. That night, while the rest of Oakmeadow Hollow slept, Sawyer returned to Lot 17 with this time, a metal detector. He swept slowly, carefully, near the tire tracks, near the pine roots. Then, a sharp ping. He dug. Another sealed bag. Inside, hard drives labeled by year 2019, 2020. 20-1, encrypted. Sawyer took them home, placed them in a fireproof lockbox, and sent Colt a photo. Need access? Priority. Colt replied. On it. The following day, the HOA called an emergency meeting. Board only, they said. Behind closed doors, no agenda published. Sawyer didn't wait for permission. He emailed every homeowner a copy of the Lot 17 footage. Then, he uploaded a redacted version to a private YouTube link, embedded with time-stamped commentary and overlays. He titled it simply, What They Don't Want You to Know. He sent the link to the county board, the local paper, and a journalist he'd served with overseas who now worked with an investigative podcast. Within 6 hours, it was viral in town. Within 12, county inspectors were at the HOA office with clipboards and cameras. Gretchen denied everything. She claimed the land confusion was a mistake, the gazebo, a community effort, the guards, standard protocol. She even accused Sawyer of trespassing on her properties. But it was too late, because while she blustered in interviews, Sawyer was meeting with DA investigator Tessa in a quiet coffee shop off the highway. He showed her the photos, the video, the maps, the warning note, and most of all the handgun. Tessa stared at the weapon for a long time. Where'd you find it? Lot Dizisechi. She looked up, jaw tight. I'm escalating. You've got enough here to trigger a full criminal probe. What about the people who helped cover it up? If what you've got holds, they're going down too. She paused, then added, just be careful. People like Gretchen don't go quietly. Sawyer nodded. He already knew that. Later that night, Sawyer stood alone near the edge of the trail, the same place Bucky used to bark at squirrels and chase sticks, and now, that trail had become a war zone. But Sawyer didn't feel fear. He felt ready, because he wasn't just exposing the HOA anymore. He was dismantling it, one secret at a time. The deeper Sawyer Ridge dug, the more rot he found. The HOA wasn't just corrupted, was infected from the inside out. What started as territorial harassment had unraveled into criminal conspiracy, buried secrets, and the haunting suggestion that people had simply vanished when they got in the way. But through all the noise, one question still gnawed at him like a splinter under the skin. Who pulled the trigger that killed Bucky? He knew the name of the private security company, Crimson Shield Solutions. They were listed on a fake invoice submitted by the HOA for property monitoring, but the shooter's identity had been withheld in the original police report, hidden under employee protection protocols. Sawyer wasn't buying it, and now that he had cult decrypting the HOA hard drives recovered from Lot 17, answers were beginning to pour in. Late one night, a message popped up on Sawyer's laptop. "I've got your shooter. Name, Wesley Bragg, ex-cop suspended in 2018, got hired by Crimson Shield 2 years ago. Guess who submitted his resume to the HOA directly? Gretchen Langley." Attached was a blurry video clip security footage from the HOA office. Wesley, wearing a gray hoodie, sitting across from Gretchen and Mike Cleason, the treasurer. A document? On the table. Gretchen pointing at a trail map. Sawyer leaned closer. The time stamped. 2 weeks before Bucky was shot, he felt his throat tighten. His grip on the mouse turned white-knuckled. This wasn't just negligence. Gretchen had ordered it, replayed the moment when Bucky collapsed on the trail, blood staining the leaves. For a while, he'd blamed the company, the system. But now, it had a name, a face. Wesley Bragg. Sawyer ran his plates through a connection Tessa gave him. Wesley was living out in Larkspur, remote off-grid, and guess what? He hadn't filed a single report since the shooting. No statements, no apologies. He was hiding. The next morning, Sawyer drove out with a dash cam rolling and a manila envelope on the passenger seat, copies of everything. He didn't want a confrontation. He wanted the truth. Wesley's house was a small cabin surrounded by scrub pines and rusted fencing. His truck sat parked out front, dented and mud splattered. Sawyer knocked once. The door opened, halfway, and there he was. Wesley looked older than expected, gaunt, beard unkempt, eyes hollow. "You're Ridge, aren't you?" he asked. Sawyer nodded. "You shot my dog." Wesley looked down. "I didn't know he was a dog at first. Just movement. Gretchen told me your land was HOA owned. She said someone was sabotaging the new build." Sawyer's jaw tensed. "So, you shot?" Wesley stepped back. "You don't know what she told me. She said you were violent, that you had a record, said I might have to protect myself. And you believed her. I was broke. I needed work. She paid cash. No uniforms, no cameras. She said if I followed orders, I'd get a bonus." Sawyer handed him the envelope. Inside was a copy of the deed, a photo of Bucky, and a notice of formal complaint to the DAS office. "Your name's going public, unless you give me a statement, on camera." Wesley hesitated. Then slowly, he nodded, "Back in town." Sawyer played the recording for Tessa. It was everything they needed. Proof that the HOA under Gretchen's leadership had weaponized false claims, trespassed on private land, and authorized lethal force under false pretenses. That same afternoon, Tessa filed for an injunction. The HOA board was frozen from making any financial transactions or land use decisions. Gretchen tried to call an emergency vote to remove the motion. No one showed up. Even her allies were scattering like roaches. Sawyer stood by his window that night, watching the trail under a sky full of stars. It used to be peaceful here. Now the path looked like a battlefield. The ghost of Bucky still lingered in the leaves. In the silence, Dana came up behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did what no one else would," she whispered. Sawyer didn't answer. He just watched as a county vehicle pulled up. Across the road, inspectors arriving to assess HOA Lot 12. Another whistleblower had mentioned it. Another quiet zone where no one mowed the grass, but the HOA budget showed thousands spent on drainage improvement. He already knew what they'd find. Buried documents. Bribes. Maybe something worse. He wasn't done digging, not until Gretchen faced the law, not until every stolen dollar, every silenced homeowner, every lie was dragged into daylight, and not until the HOA that took Bucky away from him was gone for good. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. at the county courthouse. On paper, it was just a motion to freeze Oak Meadow Hollow's operations pending a formal investigation. But for Sawyer Ridge, it was something more. It was war. He arrived early in a pressed shirt and worn jeans, his old army boots polished to a shine. The manila folder in his hand held everything: maps, footage, the signed whistleblower letters, Wesley Bragg's video confession. Every page felt like a round in the chamber. The courthouse lobby was packed. Local reporters, residents from Oak Meadow Hollow, angry homeowners with yard signs tucked under their arms. A few had even printed T-shirts with "Free the Trail" in bold block letters. The HOA board had ruled for years with little resistance, but now their kingdom was collapsing, and the townspeople had come to watch it burn. At the front of the crowd stood Gretchen Langley, pearls, pink blazer, smile like a funeral director. She spotted Sawyer and walked straight over, heels clicking like gunfire. "You think you've won something," she hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I built that neighborhood. You're just a squatter with a grudge." Sawyer didn't blink. "You built a prison," he said, "and now the walls are caving in." Before she could respond, a voice cut through the lobby. "Mr. Ridge, Miss Langley." Courtroom's open. Inside, the room was wood-paneled and cold. Judge Teresa Halbrook sat at the bench, sharp and no-nonsense. She scanned the documents, the legal briefs, the evidence files. Then she looked at Sawyer. You've submitted serious allegations. Mr. Ridge, fraud, trespass, endangerment. Why bring it to court instead of your HOA board? Sawyer stood. Because the board is the problem. They've weaponized policy, fabricated easements, hired private security without permits, and when I pushed back, they shot my dog. Gasps echoed through the gallery. He continued, we've found illegal payments, buried weapons, confession from the shooter. The HOA isn't a governing body anymore, it's a shield for criminal activity. Across the aisle, Gretchen's lawyer sputtered a rebuttal. All hearsay and speculation. The HOA had no knowledge of. I have video proof, Sawyer said, stepping forward, and a witness willing to testify. The courtroom doors creaked open. And in walked Aaron Fisk. Alive. Not in hiding. Not vanished. He looked older, thinner, but his jaw was tight and his eyes locked on Gretchen. Sawyer had found him 2 days earlier, living under a new name in Oregon. After the tip, he tracked down the deed transfer of Aaron's house. The buyer, a shell company tied to HOA funds. Aaron had agreed to return on one condition, full immunity and federal protection. Now, he took the stand and began to speak. I served on the HOA board for 4 years. I believed in helping the neighborhood. Until Gretchen and Mike started cooking the books, they took kickbacks from contractors, bought out properties, and when I threatened to report them, Gretchen had someone send a message. He held up his hand, revealing a long scar across his palm. They tried to make it look like a break-in. I got scared. I left. The judge listened, stone-faced. By the time Aaron finished, Gretchen's hands were shaking. The judge turned to her. Ms. Langley, do you have a response? She opened her mouth but nothing came out. Only silence. Judge Halbrook slammed the gavel. I'm freezing all HOA operations effective immediately. A forensic audit will be conducted. Criminal charges are being recommended to the district attorney. The room exploded in murmurs. Sawyer didn't smile, he just exhaled. But outside the courthouse, the war wasn't over. Reporters swarmed, cameras rolled, microphones flashed. Sawyer stepped up to the podium and spoke. This isn't just about one trail or one dog. This is about power, abuse, and silence. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. Fight back. Know your property lines. Read the fine print, and if someone tries to take what's yours, don't roll over, stand. Applause erupted from the crowd, but just as Sawyer turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from Colt got into Lot 12's surveillance folder. You need to see this. He opened the video clip. What he saw stopped him cold. There, in black and white night vision footage from a hidden camera behind the HOA's drainage lot, was Gretchen. 2 years ago. Digging with Mike, loading bags into the ground. One of them twitched. Sawyer's heart pounded. This wasn't just corruption anymore. This was murder. Sawyer Ridge's hands trembled as he watched the grainy night vision footage again. Gretchen Langley and Mike Cleason, under the cloak of darkness, digging into Lot 12's soil, their movements frantic but calculated. They buried something alive. The slight movement in one of the bags wasn't a trick of the light. It was a person. His heart hammered. The truth he'd feared was worse than he imagined. He immediately called Tessa. Get the county sheriff and feds too. Lot 12, now send backup. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, pacing his living room. Then the calls flooded in. The sheriff's team uncovered a shallow grave. Inside, a man, unconscious, but breathing, a rescue. Paramedics rushed the man to the hospital. He was weak, dehydrated, but alive. The media caught wind fast. Within hours, Gretchen Langley was arrested at her home, ranting about a witch hunt. Mike Cleason turned himself in. The HOA board dissolved, and the community, shattered but healing. The man in the grave was revealed to be Aaron, Fisk's brother, an investigative journalist who had been digging into Oak Meadow's dark secrets, and disappeared months earlier. The entire operation, it turned out, was a web of intimidation, fraud, and violence. But the victory was bittersweet. Sawyer stood on the trail one last time, looking at the now cleared path where Bucky used to run. He'd won. The HOA was gone, but the scars remained. Dana held his hand tightly. We did it, she said softly. Yeah, Sawyer whispered, but some things don't come back. He knelt down and pulled a small plaque from his pocket, engraved simply, in memory of Bucky, the bravest dog Oak Meadow ever knew. He planted it beneath the tallest pine, where sunlight filtered through leaves like a promised dot. As the sun set, the community gathered neighbors, who once feared Gretchen's rule, now sharing stories, rebuilding trust, and reclaiming their neighborhood. Sawyer knew this wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. Because sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming what's rightfully yours and making sure no one ever forgets. Call to action if you've ever felt powerless against a system. Remember, Sawyer's fight. Stand up, speak out, protect what matters most. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are more stories like this coming and you won't want to miss a single one.